Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tulsa World Ginnie Graham Show. That's what I'm starting to call it. Um, but we are in a post-election analytical phase of things. And so I invited on David Blatt, my old friend, who is probably one of the best public policy analysts I know, and one of the most sought after in Oklahoma. And he's also a former community advisory board member. He, for a long time, ran the Oklahoma Policy Institute. Um, but the analysis that he posted on his personal social media page caught my attention. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. So, to set it up, what you did after this last week's election, you looked precinct by precinct in Tulsa, about 151 precincts, and compared the results of the Tulsa mayoral election to the presidential outcomes precinct to precinct, which I found fascinating. And I just wanted to, can you explain a little bit what themes emerged from your analysis?
Sure. And thank you for the invitation, Ginny.
Mhm.
And I would like to say, for those who have followed me socially, I did support Monroe-Nichols in the mayor's race in a personal capacity. I think today I'm speaking more as a data guy who's crunching numbers and not from an advocate position. Um, but it was an interesting and unusual campaign because you had a nonpartisan race. There were seven candidates starting off, but really there were three major candidates, two of whom were registered Democrats, Monroe-Nichols and Karen Keith, and one was a registered Republican, Brent Van Norman. And we ended up in a situation where the two candidates who made it to the runoff were both Democrats. But what we found, and we'll get into the numbers, is that even though you had two Democrats in the race, the vote did break out on partisan ways, in ways that might have been unexpected, at least anybody who wasn't following the campaign closely. So basically, what I did was using data that was available from the state election board. You can go to their website, you can go to the results. It takes a little bit of digging, but you can find for the basically looked at three sets of numbers, but all at the precinct level. So obviously we don't know how any individual voter voted, but we can look at the precinct level and say what was the breakdown of the precinct in terms of party registration among the voters, in terms of their vote for president, and in terms of their vote for mayor. And that's what I did. Looked at there were 151 precincts in the city of Tulsa that I looked at, and looked at how the vote for mayor correlated with the vote for president and party registration. So that's kind of what my analysis was based on. I will also say it's not very sophisticated. It was much more sort of comparing large numbers, rather than doing a fine-grained analysis that would take more work.
So, what did you find as far as trends go? Did you find,
Yeah.
or did you find any trends? I mean, what,
Found
okay, so
some
what were
definite
they?
things. Um, I would say the top line result was that Monroe Nichols did extremely well in consolidating the support of registered Democrats. He did very well in those precincts that had the strongest Democratic registration, and the strongest support for Kamala-Harris as president. Conversely, Karen Keith did quite poorly in those Democratic areas. Um, she did better in precincts with higher Republican registration and more support for Donald Trump, but she did not do as well in Republican precincts as Monroe Nichols did in Democratic precincts. So I think what you found is that at least by the time of the general election, where it was narrowed down to two candidates, even though both were registered Democrats, Monroe Nichols won overwhelmingly among Democrats, and did relatively well among registered Republicans. So
So
you
was
had, so
so
just,
was it
just to repeat
like
that. Yeah, go ahead.
so the way I'm understanding it is, so if Karen Keith, Commissioner Keith, and President Trump won the same precinct, Donald Trump won it by a bigger margin than Commissioner Keith did. That's sort of what you found.
That's largely true.
Okay.
In the precincts that Kamala-Harris won, Monroe-Nichols won almost all of them. Um, in the precincts that Donald Trump won by the largest margins, it was much more divided. So there were 73 precincts in the city of Tulsa won by Trump. Um, and his winning margin in those precincts was 20, average winning margin or overall was 20 points. Karen Keith won those precincts overall, but by just 2.5 points.
Okay.
Trump won them by 20, Keith won them by 2.5. And actually, of the 73 precincts that Trump won, Keith won 38, Nichols won 35.
Okay.
So those precincts that Trump won were pretty closely divided. Nichols did fairly well. He lost them, but he didn't lose them by big margins. Conversely, in those areas that were strongest for Harris were also very strong for Nichols. In fact, Monroe did better in those areas that Kamala Harris won than Kamala Harris did.
Oh, really? Well, that does bring me to a question I didn't think of before, which was, did who won the city of Tulsa, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Kamala Harris very narrowly.
Really?
According to my numbers, and there's a few precincts that are a little that I had to exclude because um there were just the numbers were just really weird. But that was like 4 out of the 100. So I'm looking at 151 precincts in the city of Tulsa, and the total vote was something like 51.2 for Monroe, I'm sorry, 51.2% for Kamala Harris, 48.8% for Donald Trump. So the city of Tulsa is definitely purple, and it is, at least in this election, narrowly for Harris.
So was there much of a drop off between people who voted for president versus the mayor, or did most people vote for both?
Most people voted for both, more so than I kind of expected. So if you look at the precinct by precinct results, there were a lot of, generally most of the precincts, if you just added them up, the vote for mayor was somewhere between 97 to 99% of the vote for president. So you had um, tipped, let me know that you were going to ask this. So I looked at one precinct in North Tulsa. There were 1,236 ballots cast for president, 1,226 ballots cast for mayor. One in South Tulsa, 720-181, for those who want to check it. There were something like 1,511 for president, 1,490 for mayor. So even though people were handed two ballots and did have the choice of submitting the presidential ballot and not submitting the mayoral ballot, um, the overwhelming majority of people voted for both. And there were some precincts where the number of votes cast for mayor was slightly higher than the number of votes cast for president.
I wondered if the two ballots encouraged people to vote for both, because I wonder if it was all on one ballot, people by the end
Might have just
wouldn't
gone
vote.
bold.
Where I kind of wonder if you have one ballot and for a lot of people had one name on it, that, well, you might as well make a choice there. So
Well, I know when I went to vote, I did early voting at the county election board. They handed me the mayoral ballot first on top and then the presidential one. I don't know if that was intentional and if that was the case for everybody, but that certainly encouraged,
go ahead and do that.
knowing that
So
there was a mayoral. So
you
that
admit,
was not a big factor.
okay. So You had mentioned on your social media post, again, personal post, but it's a fascinating analysis, that you found a correlation between voter registration and outcomes. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So similar to, I think whether you look at the correlation between the presidential vote and the mayoral vote, or the correlation between party registration and the mayoral vote, that you can see a pretty strong correlation. In both cases, Monroe-Nichols was very successful in consolidating the support of Democrats, whereas Karen Keith did rather poorly among Democrats, did better among Republicans, but not well enough. And so it's an interesting question. Had Brett Van Norman pulled a few more votes in the first round in August and made it into the runoff, and you'd had a registered Democrat versus a registered Republican, what the outcome would have been. The final outcome we haven't actually mentioned. Monroe-Nichols won by about 10 points, 55% to 45% roughly, maybe 56, 44. My sense is that if you had a identified card-carrying Republican on the ballot, it would have been closer. I still think Monroe-Nichols would have had a strong chance and would have likely won against Brent Van Norman. But this was just an interesting race where you had two Democrats, but one of whom was really strongly supported by most Democrats, at least by November. The other was really sort of abandoned by her party, or she abandoned her party. You could argue it either way, but didn't have as much success in, consolidating the support of all Republicans, as well as a good share of independents.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of the nonpartisan race for the municipal races, because we really focus in on who the people are, and so I think that's what we did here. And well, people are still interested in party politics, especially in a presidential year. I like that we've had an experience of really focusing in on positions and vision for the city and that kind of thing. But what do you think when you think of like overall, when you think of what this means for Tulsa overall? You mentioned that we're purple. Is this a changing landscape, or is this a byproduct of just having two registered Democrats? Or, I mean, how do you think Tulsa looks? Because there's a difference between registration and political identification. Do you think that Tulsa is changing its political identification?
I think Tulsa has been a competitive, bipartisan city for a long time. I've been in Tulsa since the mid 1990s, and the first mayor when I lived here was a Democrat, Susan Savage, followed by a Republican, Bill LaFortune, followed by a Democrat, Kathy Taylor, followed by Republican Dewey Bartlett, another Republican, G.T. Bynum, who had at least initially strong support among Democrats. And now we have another Democrat. So, if you look at congressional politics, the first district has been Republican for a very long time. But that's because the surrounding areas are strongly Republican. I think I may have misstated that and said that we're strongly Democrat. But
You said Republican.
I said Republican. Okay, so we don't necessarily see that at the congressional level, but I think if you look at municipal politics, if you look at the makeup of the city council, again, nonpartisan elections, but many people know the partisan breakdown. And we have Republicans on the city council, we have Democrats, pretty fair balance, and I think it's been a real mix of both parties for a long time. So I'm not sure that this election signifies a major difference. But what was, different was to have two candidates who both had won, previously had been elected in partisan races. So it was known that, Karen Keith had won as a Democratic county commissioner, Monroe-Nichols had won as a Democratic House member.
So to end this, you followed this with a post yesterday that I found fascinating. And I think it was more about the mood of the country now. And some people are just tired. They're depressed or anxious or happy, whatever. But people overall, there's this sense of, and I've seen this, like tune out the news, tune out things. And you said that you understand that. But if you tune out too much, you end up giving, you tune out power, and you might give power to people who abuse it. And I thank you, because what you pointed out was, by doing that, for people like reporters at the local level who are out trying to keep people informed, if people choose not to be informed, it harms us as a democracy. And so I kind of wanted to end on that, and to give you a last word, in thinking about that idea, how do we balance our consumption of news and information and analysis, putting these elections in perspectives? What are some last words that you want to offer on that?
I can't say that I have a great answer to it. And when I put that out there and confess to my own mixed emotions here, part of me just wanting to turn everything off, shut everything down, and bury myself in a hole for an extended period of time, versus knowing that more than any other time, that being aware of what's going on, being vigilant, and making my voice heard is important. There's a real tension there. What was interesting is, when I shared that and asked people to share their thoughts and coping strategies, many people responded that they are looking to focus more at the local level, where you can have an impact and make a difference. Because, honestly, we're not going to have a big impact on what the Trump administration is going to do with regards to foreign policy, or even, well, immigration policy may be an exception. There may be a few other exceptions. But, I think a lot of people are feeling, choose the issues that you most care about and feel like you can have an impact on. And in most cases, that's going to be at the local and state level more so than at the national level. But I don't know that we have the luxury of just tuning all of it out, because we are, I think, living in especially fraught times. And I think that if those who are in power get the sense that people are not paying attention, that they're just, circulation numbers are down, viewership numbers are down, audiences are down, that will, give them more of a green light to just do whatever they feel that they can get away with. And that, I think is dangerous.
If the consequence is that more people get involved locally, then I'll take it, because I've always said that's within our power and it makes the most difference, which is where I spend
Yeah.
most of my time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I enjoy your analysis, and I'm glad that you're still putting that out there, even if it is on your personal social media page. So
All
thank you
right.
for letting me shine a little light on that.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Jenny.